Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host. We've got some great articles we're going to be talking about today. The FCC talking about space junk, a drone prison attack in Ecuador, the supply chain issues in the Ukraine when it comes to drones that are coming from China. And then we're going to end the show with some new avatars, virtual avatars from Meta, and we'll let you determine whether or not those are good or not. We've got some great guests to talk about these topics today, and I'm going to start with David. David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Mike. First of all, thanks for inviting me. This is first time I've been on Full Crew, and I love the format because I actually get to listen and learn as well as just speak at the same time. So it's very useful. My background is, first of all, the thing I love to do is really bring new technology into new markets. And I've done that from very large companies. I've worked at IBM for a while, and I've worked at a range of startup companies doing it at the same time. Most of my background is in cybersecurity, range cybersecurity, and now I'm currently working in counter UAS technology as well. Love the area. It's fascinating from a technology perspective, from a legal perspective, and from the kinds and number of markets and people you meet. It's really fantastic. So thanks again for inviting me.
Yeah, and we've been excited to see that space evolve from kind of humble beginnings to now really, really interesting and practical technology. We also have Andrew with us today. So Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Andrew Wilkins. I'm the CEO here at Ascend Engineering. We're UAV software engineering consultants in the space. I myself am a software engineer. It's what I love to do, be an engineer and do software. So thanks for having me on.
Really underselling how talented you are. Everybody at the so in the PX4 ecosystem, Andrew is very well known. As you know, I work with Drone Code, and I was lucky enough to meet Andrew at Commercial UAV, our other friends and partners. All right, so like I said, we got a great show today. We're going to start with the FCC on space junk. This is something Dawn and I have been talking about for probably over a year when she first brought it to my attention. And what's the FCC think about junk in space?
Well, Mike, they actually just took their first enforcement action. For those that don't know, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC in the United States, actually has jurisdiction over a lot of matters in space, including licensure for satellites. And this is the very first enforcement action against a company, and in this case, it was Dish. They failed to properly deorbit their EchoStar 7 satellite. Why do you care, and why is this a big deal? Because as Mike says, junk or space junk is a big problem. Any kind of space debris, and when we say space debris, we're talking about human-made objects that often orbit the Earth that no longer serve a purpose in space. There are a ridiculous amount of this debris. There is a ridiculous amount of this debris floating around space. And I think they're saying in total, there's around 34,000 pieces of space junk larger than 10 centimeters circling the Earth, and millions of even smaller pieces. And even something as small as a paint chip that comes in the wrong direction at orbital speed, which by the way is 17,500 miles per hour. If that hit an astronaut on a spacewalk, that could be fatal. And if it hit an aircraft or a satellite, again, it could just create more space junk, and things are just exploding all over the place. And you can imagine the kind of domino effect that could occur, in one of these incidents if it's catastrophic. So in this case, it was $150,000 penalty for Dish. What happened, and this wasn't intentional, this wasn't like, hey, we have a deorbit plan and we're just going to blow it off. They actually essentially ran out of fuel. And so they could only move it so far out of its normal orbit. And by the way, this thing is in geospatial orbit, which is about 22,000 miles above the equator. And the plan was to get this thing higher than geo, get it out of the geo orbit. and they couldn't quite get high enough, and they did get fined. So it's a big deal, and I think the implications for this are that the FCC's moving out, man. They're taking action. I think that's a big criticism of the FAA. Whether it's remote ID manufacturers not hitting the compliance state, even after they push that grace period out, you don't see any enforcement actions happening. But the FCC is doing that in space. So that's all I'm saying. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it.
Yeah, interesting point about the FAA. I'll bring back to that later. But David, what do you think?
I found this article fascinating. I mean, I knew a little bit about this area, not an expert, but two things, a couple things that hit me is one, similar to where I'm working in counter drone. I think the awareness is really important, that people will become aware of what's happening. I mean, one thing that helped is, I know there was a movie Gravity a number of years ago, which is really about getting hit with space junk. I mean, what happens after, is an interesting thing, but the fact of how dangerous it actually is. You mentioned the speed, which blew me away, and just that number. And when I looked that up, how fast they're really moving, they said that's like 10 times faster than a bullet, which is really phenomenal how quickly they go. And the other thing, though, as far as why I thought it was so important from an awareness perspective, is I realized I was reading and I go, we could eventually get to a critical point where there's so much space junk, it actually prevents us from orbiting other kinds of satellites and other things out there. And that's really the danger. People go, so there's a lot of junk out in space, so what? But that's to me is really the critical thing. So I'm glad to see them starting to enforce that, because we could run into a serious problem if this starts to escalate and we hit that critical point.
Great point.
Yeah. It's very scary to kind of think that more and more companies are launching satellites today, and it's harder for this to be enforced than almost anything else. Because it's one thing, who owns the sea? We've taken thousands of years to work that out, but like, how do you actually manage space? It's so far afield from us. That issues are certainly going to arise. Don, it looked like you wanted to say something.
No, I didn't actually. I was waiting to hear what Andrew had to say.
All right. Yeah.
Listen, I think it's great that the FCC put this into action, right? Dish was like, all right, our bad, we'll pay the fine. But when you spend $230 million to put a satellite into space, $150,000 is chump change. Like, their market cap is $2.65 billion. Now the ISS this year have already tried to change its orbit 3 times in 2020 to avoid space debris. That number is only going to increase. So I think it's fantastic that they did this, but $150,000 is not going to cut it. Even this year, I think it was Dr. Frank Rubio. He spent 371 consecutive days in space, but that was by complete accident. That was because there was damage to a spacecraft because of space junk or like a micrometeorite. So it's great, but I think they need to do more.
Oh my gosh, I just learned so much from both of you guys. That's I didn't realize that Frank Rubio was out there, because he's essentially trapped, almost like Gravity, as David mentioned. Better outcome in our case here. But Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of want to leap off of what Andrew is saying, and we see this all over the United States, where basically between regulatory capture and just regulators not actually having enforcement power from Congress, the fines aren't large enough. And sadly, in a lot of cases, especially with larger companies, they've totaled the fine into their behavior, right? So the almost, I would say, in retrospect, criminal attitude of ask forgiveness. Like, it's one thing to ask forgiveness if you're doing a small little thing and you're like, I'm not sure where it stands in this legal gray zone as I innovate. But it kind of has turned into just a mantra of like, no, we're gonna take it and see what happens. So I think if we don't want to poison the well with what is one of the most critical technologies. I was reading a post from Fiona Lake. It just accidentally tied into what we were going to talk about here, about how this is also could lead to the potential of an outage if we get a solar flare, being so reliant on this satellite technology, and then we have no ability to even move this space junk around because the sun has decided you're dead in the water now. So that's another consideration, is what if we don't even have the ability to manage it? So yeah, space junk, it's definitely I think an important consideration that finally people are becoming aware of. And I think there's actually a potential for an innovative company to figure out a way to manage it.
Yeah, junk, like
as a third party liability.
Your garbage removers of space. I mean, I think it's a viable
Wally robot following you.
Absolutely. And Mike, what I find interesting, of course, as usual, the U.S. is one of those ones that we're significantly contributing to the problem. I mean, right now, of the more than 6,700 plus operating satellites, 4,500 plus of them are from us, from the United States. So, I forget who said it, whether it was you, Mike, or David or Andrew, but, like policing this and the fact that it's global and so far afield, and how do you do it? Well, we are responsible for a lot of the active satellites. Now, there's already a lot of dead ones up there. I mean, I think that EASA, right, the European air, I think it's Air and Space Agency. Am I saying that right? EASA? I forget the name of the acronym. I'm sorry, my brain isn't working right now.
That's how I say it.
But okay,
so we could both be wrong together.
They track these things, and so if you check out their website, they've got some great information on this stuff too. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. I never really thought about that the fine was a mere pittance for these companies. Great point. Great point about awareness. I mean, you guys really were all over this. So, but we'll see. I mean, hopefully there won't have to be more enforcement actions, but I think, I suspect sadly there will need to be. And maybe the FCC should listen to Andrew and jack that price up a little bit.
Please.
Yeah, I'll send the link to their doorstep.
There you go.
They could watch the episode back. All right. So, favorite topic on the show, drones. And, we're starting to see a lot of these inevitable headlines that we all kind of knew we'd see a decade ago just popping up more. So David brought this one to our attention. David, tell us a little bit about this drone attack in Ecuador.
Sure. Thanks. So the article essentially was that somebody took a drone and was looking to assassinate a member inside of a prison, and they used a drone. They attached a bomb to it, which you see constantly happening, obviously, in other war zones. But they do it with a prison, and they were looking to explode it. In this case, they managed to intercept it as it landed, and they did a controlled explosion. So it still landed, still caused a lot of damage, and did a control exposure. What caught my attention about it is a couple of things. Is one, again, I bring up the awareness. I'm not so sure. There's a lot of good things happening with drones, but there's also a lot of potential risks going on at this point. And I'm not sure the magnitude of that issue was clearly understood. And the thing that caught me about the Ecuador article is 3 weeks before the article came out, I had somebody from Ecuador actually call me about the problems that they're having in prisons, and that there's drug smuggling going on, arms, weapons. And by the way, you never, ever want to get caught inside of an Ecuadorian prison. Guy told me they have no control of inside the prison. It's run by the cartels. The police don't really control. The only thing they can control is what comes into the prison. So they're looking for means to prison. And this is the number one way they get drugs and arms in the prison, is they use drones to fly them into the prison. So that was their reason for calling and being interested, because they want to try to prevent it from getting in the first place. Because they said once it gets in there, in Ecuador, they don't have an issue. Now, he was actually surprised that we have a very similar issue in the U.S. Not that we have lack of control in the prisons, but that it is the number one way that people are smuggling drugs and arms inside prisons. It's extremely effective, approach to be able to do. And part of this brings up kind of call me, because it's more of again, an awareness issue to get to whether Congress to do more about this and people to understand, because I think the awareness has come up between the war in Ukraine, and we'll see, obviously in Israel, we'll see more and more what's going on between Israel and Hamas with drones, but also that there's tons of it going on in the country. The border, the amount of fentanyl coming over the border is phenomenal. You talk to the Border Patrol, they're using drones as well to monitor the Border Patrol agents and see where they are so that they can cross in other areas, and they don't even know how many actually are going over there. I'll tell you, we did something at an airport, which is obviously really dangerous for having an unauthorized drone in the area. We were doing some testing with the FAA at a small airport in Atlantic City. In 24 hours, just 24 hours, we detected 70 drones flying around the area.
Oh my God.
So they're very difficult to see. So people look up, they think, we don't see them, but there's a ton of them. And there's one thing that hit me even harder than that. Last week, 2 weeks ago, there's an FBI agent I spoke to, works in a local office with the local police for Louisiana. And they started there's a tool called Aeroscope that you can't use anymore. They don't sell it anymore, but basically it detected and tracked one kind of drone from DJI. And they started doing this a couple of years ago. And in a few parishes in New Orleans, in 1 year, they detected 150,000 drones flying over the area. And he's trying to bring this up to the FAA and to others to highlight the magnitude. And in this area, he said, look, they were flying over a nuclear power plant. They're flying in airport space. They're flying over ports. They were flying over, they do a lot of grain processing there, and they're flying over the food plants and the grain processing.
Wow.
And grain can be explosive too.
Good point.
Under the right circumstances. And
a huge number of them, some are malicious, some are just negligent, and they try to go and find and bring them down. But I think it's why this caught my attention, because it really does highlight, the issue when somebody's dropping a bomb with it. But there's a lot of other potential things, from industrial espionage, through cyber attacks, through small bombs, through bringing them in stadiums. And I think it was very important to actually bring up and get people to understand. And I know there's regulation trying to go through Congress to enable law enforcement to use more stronger tools out there to be able to try to track and prevent it. And I think the urgency is critical. I hate to see us wait to the point when we get to a major disaster before we then say, hey, we've got to do something. But things are happening out there now. And that was the key reason why I was interested in this article, caught my attention.
All right. Well, thank you. Andrew.
So, what do you think?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I don't know too much about the counter UAV side of things, but I do know a lot about how these UAVs are put together. What radios are they using, where they got the parts from, what ground control station that they're using. So I was actually able to find the drone that they used for this. And there is like a major online dealer that sells these. I won't say who, but it rhymes with Glamazon. And so you can go. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculously easy. And then, there's these big major like drone producers that they might sell their tools, and they say, we don't allow our drones to fly over prisons, or we can prevent people from flying here and there. But there is so many other flight controllers out there, ground control stations, that it's just so hard to regulate all of them. And then just with the bad actors in the space, it's got to be a mess to try to have counter UAVs set up for these. Like, the only way that I could think of is just putting nets around the actual prison. And David, I'm sure that you're well more versed in this than I am, but that's the only thing that I could think of. I was wondering what the solutions of this even would be in your eyes for this prison.
So there are a lot. Well, nets, first of all, for a bomb wouldn't really work very well. If they were going to drop an explosive, that net won't really hold up. It's interesting when you talk to like the DEA and others, what they're really looking to do is to get the operators. Because even if you get, one drone, so you stop one thing from happening, if you get the operator, at least you're potentially stopping a group from being able to do it, and do it there. And one guy I was talking to said, look, they sometimes notice there are groups of people doing this, and they were capturing serial numbers and even seeing the same serial numbers of the drones from one place to the next. So that there's
Wow.
actually, in some cases, it's more coordinated than that. And there are groups who are actually contracting out to go ahead and break in there. And they notice the same serial number. I will tell you from doing it, there is technology out there. There's safe stuff to be able to do this. Um, Without getting all this, I mean, one area that's fascinating about this is everything from, I mean, my company deals with RF, protocol analysis, but there's also, RF scanning, there's jamming, there's a whole range of both detecting and then mitigating it. And there are safe ways. A lot of the challenge is some of these aren't yet legal for local law enforcement to use. There's a handful of small groups of people in federal agencies who can not possibly cover the range. It's got to get down to local law enforcement. And it's a combination of training people how to do that and how to protect it, as well as permitting the technology to be used that doesn't interfere and that's safe with everything to actually do it. So the mechanisms are there, but it takes some time.
I'd love to jump on top of that if that's okay, Mike.
Yeah.
Couple things. I'm going to talk about the legal stuff in a second, but what really jumped out at me from this article, David, was, having been in the United States Air Force for almost 25 years on active duty, what a freaking logistical nightmare this was. They literally emptied that prison when that thing landed on the roof. And then, as you said, to mitigate, I mean, just think about transferring all those people that are like running the prison anyway, the like gang members. I mean, I'm sure that was safe and easy. And then, and then the fact that they like blew it up and then blew a hole in the roof. So, like it's almost, I don't want to say the cure was worse than the disease, but it is at least like equivalent to it. Maybe they didn't get to assassinate the person they were looking to harm, but they certainly did some major damage to that building, and it was self-inflicted essentially because they just didn't have the right technology to see this thing in advance coming, and then to do something like cyber technology of taking it over and landing it safely somewhere well outside of a danger zone. So on the legal side, what frightens me, and by the way, I was just at the Colorado Drone Air Show this weekend, and also the FAA's Drone and On event in Greeley, Colorado, and gave several different talks over the course of 3 days, and a lot of them were to members of the general public as well as public safety. And for the general public, they were like, whoa, what do you mean? Like our police don't have the ability to detect or mitigate drones? Like their minds were blown. And I'm like, this is the thing that honestly keeps me up at night. Like this is the thing I worry about. And I talked about this, over a year ago, in my 5 minutes of fame on CNN, with Kim Brunhuber, interviewed me for 5 minutes about that report that came out about the drone they found at the Pennsylvania substation that looked like it was trying to take out that substation. And I said it then. This is the thing that keeps me up at night. And I don't know why we're still talking about it. Like, why are we not doing something? And those authorities are expiring, even for those 5 federal agencies. They've been extended, and we don't have an FAA reauthorization. The government is limping along on a continuing resolution, which, by the way, fun fact, I did learn this from the FAA on Thursday. I didn't realize their authorization extends, unlike everybody else's. It extends all the way through December. But still, it's just duct tape and Band-Aids at this point.
Yeah, and I'm kind of reaching the point where a lot of statements made by the FAA 3 to 4 years ago about why we needed to create things like remote ID, how we were going to create a safe environment, a lot of the concerns that they elevated to, rightfully so, to the commercial drone space, they're not addressed by the lagging response and actual regulatory clarity, right? These open holes, like, we don't want a drone to bring down a plane. That hurts the whole industry. We don't want a drone to, if an incident happens, police and local authorities being unable to actually get the perpetrator. These are things that anybody in the general public would agree to. The industry agrees to it. The Congress agrees to it. So why are we here, right? So especially with things with like I think the sloppy rollout on remote ID recently, I think it's just hurting us. We need to get to this faster because these inevitable headlines will continue if we don't. David, Andrew, you got one last thing?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's even software in general where we are in the United States. I think, and this is off the cuff, but I believe it was like the head of software for the CIA a while ago, maybe it was like a year or 6 months ago, pretty much just quit his job and was like, we are so far behind. We are so far behind other countries. So I think it's not only a UAV problem, but a software problem in general.
Yeah, it's hard to get technologists to sign into government work too, and they tried to do that. I think they had Doug Cutting from Google, who is the reason that Google used to have no spam in my Gmail, and now since he's gone, I do. But he had done some government service, and there was like an effort to get those people in, but it's very hard culturally to get them to mix and mingle. How do you mix open source with top-down control? You know. That's the thing. David, last licks on this one?
And I was just going to say, we are generally behind. I mean, even Europe, Europe is further ahead in deploying some of these things. Perhaps they were woken up by the situation in Ukraine, but it doesn't take much, and if you were really going to attack this country, all you have to do is go after the power transmission lines or some of the infrastructure, and within a few weeks, you'll have complete chaos. It's not a matter of the generals aren't afraid of somebody coming over with tanks and rolling through our streets. What they would worry about is somebody just taking out 50 substations, and you've knocked the country off, to be able to do that. So hopefully Congress will wake up very shortly.
Yeah, if you could extrapolate what you see after natural disasters with access to gasoline, access to power. Now do that and multiply that across 10 states, all at once. And that's the exact effect you're essentially getting. And people get pretty violent at the gas pump. I've witnessed it myself after, I think it was Sandy,
yes.
when the resources start to get low. So if you don't want a Mad Max future, please sign on to this and write your congressperson. All right, we have a quick break, but I do want to bring in a question from our first article from Kate Cruz. Do you think there's a post-orbit satellite insurance with these companies? Satellites are at the end of their life cycle. We know they have pre-launch insurance, and that's a requirement. If not, then maybe this becomes a new development in insurance. I think that's valid. If it doesn't exist, it should.
That is an awesome question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if anybody else does, but I'm actually talking to an insurance expert later today to prepare, hopefully get her on one of my panels for Law Tech Connect this year with AVSI Exponential in April 22nd. Mark your calendars now. But we're absolutely having a mayhem panel where we're going to have an insurance person, and we're also having a space and spectrum panel. And so, the nexus between those two, I never thought about it. And now we're actually going to be addressing that case. So come on down, Law Tech Connect at AVSI Exponential this year.
All right, I just want to take a quick second to thank our sponsors, Aero Vigilance, CSG Strategies, Rubric Law, and now we've added Sentrycs. So thank you to all of them for making this show possible. We're going to move on to our next article, and David kind of hinted at it a little bit. So this is Andrew's article. Ukraine War of Drones runs into an obstacle, and that is China. So why did you pick this article? What did you think was interesting?
Yeah, so I picked this article mostly because this is kind of like the first time that drones have been used, I feel like on a large scale in war. And, like we're already a year and some change into this. So I don't think, and people in the drone industry obviously know about this. The drones are being used a lot. Two main components that we can see is heavy lift drones that are dropping munitions, and then also first person FPV drones that are kind of used as suicide drones, if you will. They fly into whatever tanks, people, whatever it might be. Those are the two that we're seeing. Now, these drones that are being used, a lot of these components come from China. and not only DJI, but other flight control hardware, ground control stations that they're using. And now we're seeing China constrict the flow of UAV components to other countries. And that is hurting the people in Ukraine who are trying to put these together to help out troops. And so it's kind of a struggle about where these components come from. What are we going to do? And Dawn, I know that you're an expert on this. Like you probably know way more about this than I do. So I just chose this article because I thought it was super interesting, and I just wanted to talk about it.
So Dawn, you want to take
yeah,
lead there?
You kind of teed it up to me, but I didn't fully appreciate until you gave this article, Andrew, for us to read the extent of Chinese components that are being used. We just had a full crew a couple weeks ago. We called it the Ukraine edition, where General Paz was my co-host on that one. And we had Veronica Mudra and Andrei Loganov. Andrei actually dialed in from the Ukraine. He's designing drones and using them. And, this issue didn't come up. And what I'm seeing, and again, who this guy's sources were, and this was what, the New York Times, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Versus kind of what I think we're seeing also writ large. First of all, this number of an attrition rate of 10,000 drones a month. Holy shnikes. So that does tell me there's got to be a lot of Chinese drones out there still, because nobody, at least in the United States, is cranking out drones to that level, I think, from a production standpoint, to keep up with that kind of supply. What we've been hearing a lot, exactly, maybe it's overblown, is the use of non-Chinese drones, folks from the United States or North America, or even what Veronica talked about, a drone from Cyprus that they're using. I think it's called the Poseidon, that they're contracting with those folks to send them out to the Ukraine. It's such a global effort to provide drones and drone technology to Ukraine. And also, as you say, internally for the Ukrainians to develop their own drones or modify the FPV drones. But yeah, I mean, if a lot of these parts are coming from China and China's kind of locking down that supply, this gets the issue Mike and I have talked about multiple times on this show, supply chain, right? So we had the CHIPS Act, and people have said, for the drone industry, where are we on this? Like, why are we not creating some kind of a protection or incentive for made in America drones, right? So you have the DIU Blue program. That's not it. Let's face it. That's not it. And then you just heard about this replicator thing. And I was just talking to somebody about it this week, and we were laughing. We're like, okay, so OSD, Kathleen Hicks, goes out and says, we're going to do this replicator thing. We're looking for commercial drones. By the way, the DIU RFP on this, they want something, a commercial drone that can fly 500 nautical miles and drop munitions. Who the hell do you know is making commercial drones that can do that? Like, seriously, that's not a commercial drone. That's a military drone. And then they're like, oh yeah, there's no funding for this. There's no extra funding. So here's one thing I can tell you about fiscal law. It's one area where you do not get creative. Like, in other words, if Congress appropriated money for a specific program of record, like let's just say the Army's SRR, the short range reconnaissance program, SRR, you can't shift that money over to buy some other stuff. So I don't know how this is going to work, but I think we do have a, like to David's point, his theme today has been, if David has a theme today, like Sesame Street, it's awareness. I think this idea of awareness for supply chain is significant. And we need to start putting our money where our mouth is in the drone industry. Congress does, not just for chips, but for other critical technologies, drone components, drones, and probably also counter drone while we're at it.
Yeah, so this is going to seem like a tangential response at first, but I'm going to bring up the synthesizer producer Moog, which was bought out, and then their American factory is now being shut down. And what's happening, because I agree, supply chain is the main issue, and I think when people in the commercial drone industry hear the Department of Defense and they want to say, oh, this is just propaganda. When this is the exact actual circumstance that the Department of Defense is talking about. Like, you don't want to end up here, right? So in order to diversify the supply chain, though, and this is my belief, you can have a different opinion, we can't do it only in the United States. We actually have to aid a diversified global market and have non-adversarial partners, so that we're not beholden to one. And so I think one of the wrong lessons that was learned during the pandemic was, oh my God, we can't get masks from China. We need to build everything here. No, you just need to have more diversity, because closing the clamp down doesn't allow you to operate a normal market either. You need a lack of friction. And one of the issues with building in the United States is cost. I mean, even Skydio's drone that they just released, if you squint, you could see parts are 3D printed. And that made my heart sink, because that's not the level of reliability that replicator program is looking for. That's for sure. You know, and it's actually the level of reliability that these people on the ground in the Ukraine are working with to make it happen under emergency circumstances. But if you're going to build a real program, not that there isn't real, but you know what I mean, like a solid, reliable program that you're not working under emergency pressure because, you know, the enemies are at the gate, you really need to look into a diversified market with supply chain with non-adversarial partners. That's kind of my take after years of working in the drone industry. David, any thoughts on this article before we move on?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, the couple of things that Dawn referred to was, like, you know, U.S. beginning, the government and all beginning to ban like DJI drones and all. First of all, they looked at DJI, they banned one type, not necessarily Autel, Chinese in general.
Yeah.
Which I really don't understand. And two, it really is a matter of no one looked afterwards to say, wait, where are you going to get these from? Because we certainly can't fill up that capacity to be able to do that. And it is it's an issue in the supply chain that was really highlighted from COVID. You're right, that I think people started to understand, wait, this global supply chain with manufacturing done 90% in one place and everything coming from there is a real issue. It's part of a broader issue. You know, in drones itself, though, between the ban, what's happening in Ukraine, hopefully the market will start to stimulate the rest of the world starting to build things. And if there's one positive thing that comes eventually from Ukraine is, I have a feeling they have a lot of technical talent. And once they emerge from this, positive side is they could end up being a great supplier and manufacturer of drones, because they're building up a phenomenal amount of skills and talent in this area.
You know, David, that is a brilliant insight, and I definitely want to put a pin in it, because what people don't realize is Ukraine was doing a lot of IT services for American companies prior to this conflict or war. Yeah, this is a war at this point, right? So where do you think that technical talent that stayed in the company, where their focus went? You know, if they left their day job and went into this, they are going to be developing this technology, and they're developing it under some of the harshest kind of conditions that you possibly could. So I think you're right that there will be hopefully if and when the conflict comes to a resolution, this talent will be available to the market to be used for commercial purposes and elsewhere.
Well, I just want to jump on that. I mean, this is why, I think Sentrycs is one example of many. You see so many amazing tech companies coming out of Israel. I mean, they don't have really nice neighbors. And, when you're in that crucible and you have to survive on a daily basis, you're going to get it done. And so I think that's why you see some amazing tech coming out. We're seeing it coming out of Ukraine now. We've seen it coming out of Israel forever, and some other places. So yeah, absolutely. Trial by fire, if you will.
Yeah. So we got another comment from Kay Cruz, and I think it does highlight the kind of another side of this. So he said, Don, well spoken. Congress is more interested in the AI world. They seem to think that tightening of DJI use is a total fix from the feedback I've heard. Yes, and so that kind of like just to kind of jump on that a little bit, like for me, it's not about Chinese drones. It's about singular source of origin. That's the problem, right? So any nation can be a friend today and then an adversary tomorrow. So if you don't have a diversified market, you're in whatever partner you made at whatever time. And let's be honest with ourselves. We made partners with Chinese manufacturers. And that's fine because we get cheap goods from them. But if there's these other considerations that you have to layer on top of that, then you have to have other sources. Yeah.
Well, and Mike, again, I'm going to say something that's not popular with a lot of drone pilots because, it's like, yeah, we're the government, trust us. I think there really are cybersecurity issues. Like, I'm sorry, but, having had a TSSCI clearance in the US government and how dysfunctional our government has been for the last, I'm not even going to say how many years, this is the one issue they've locked arms on in a bipartisan manner. And that tells me that in some back room, there's information being briefed that we will never hear. And I know people don't want to agree with that. Oh, it's not plugged in the internet. There's not an issue. I don't know, Andrew, you're the engineer, but I just have to believe I do still have some faith in our government.
Don, you hit the nail on the head, which is like, yeah, sure, it's not connected to the internet. Well, what are you using as a controller? Your phone. And you're taking images of a ton of different stuff. And then your phone is connected right to the internet using the DJI app. And like we've seen, I mean, we could talk for hours about about the applications and all the security work that's gone in behind, what are they transmitting? So these things are connected. They are connected, even if it's during flight while it's up there, it's not. And if we create reliance on that, then I mean, okay, for example, like a lot of people were getting oil from Russia. What happened when that war broke out? So it's kind of a similar thing. I don't want to go on too far of a tangent, but I think you're correct. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, my whole thing with the data security angle, like, so Don and I have been known to align on logistics, but with the data security thing, I think we have to go further down the pipeline and talk about data privacy in the United States, because my issue is, like you said, Andrew, the data goes back to the phone, right? The phone is the weak point then, and then you'd be surprised. A data broker can buy your DJI app's data via a Facebook integration for posting your photos, right? And then they're buying that off the black market. And that's all possible because you have no data protection under the law, essentially, as an individual, once you work with any third party on the internet for any purpose. It's way too fluid. And that's one of the biggest giant holes. And I don't think if you stop it at the drone, you've stopped the issue. That's kind of where I take it on that. But let's talk about these funny avatar people.
On a lighter note.
This is actually one of the most serious shows we've ever had.
This has been awesome, though.
Yeah, great deep conversations. I appreciate everybody bringing their expertise. So I accidentally signed on to Twitter for work purpose the other day. I still call it Twitter. I'm not interested in calling it X. So I stopped using the app only because it stopped showing me good stuff in my feed. But boom, here we go. Lex Friedman, as soon as I sign into it, and he's talking with Mark Zuckerberg in the metaverse or whatever. So I'm not a big fan of the metaverse term. This VR technology that they were putting on display, though, initially my instinct was, wow, this is much better than what Apple has. But then when you start to think about it a little bit, what happened here was they fully scanned their bodies, and then the current VR headset was able to, just like the Apple Pro Vision, kind of track their facial movements and then map it onto these avatars that were created. So all that sounds fantastic and new and whatever, except that we saw it in Avatar like 10 years ago. So, and we also saw it on Gollum, and it's actually no different than the technology that's used by Weta in any leaps or bounds. What I do think is interesting about this is Facebook's is still pivoting into VR. And all these big companies like Apple are still trying to do VR. And I'm not fully convinced that this technology is used outside of gaming. And I do see these avatars actually here having a cool gaming use, but I don't think it's going to replace this podcast the same way that they think it will. So I just wanted to pull it out because VR is sort of like a non-starter 90% of the time when I talk with normal people, but tech people seem to be really in love with it still. Have any of you fallen in or out of love with it based on recent announcements?
Well, not on recent announcements. I do want to say that, with some of the digital twins and 3D modeling people are doing, and then they have the VR headsets to like basically, I'm not an engineer, Andrew is, but I imagine if I was an engineer and, someone can do an inspection, across the globe, that I can then use VR headset and basically walk through that building like it's real. That I think could have a very useful. Now, do I need to look like the waxy picture of Zuckerberg to do that? No. So to your point, Mike, like the humanoid, like the human emotions and, oh, look, the eyes are so expressive. Like who's using that? Like you said, gamers. But I think VR and even augmented reality, AR, has definite uses in a whole bunch of different sectors, and definitely dovetails with the drone industry, especially kind of on the mapping and inspection side. So, I'm kind of a fan of the VR thing. Like the first time I saw it was, and Mike, I know you remember Key AI, QII.ai. These guys are out of Canada. Michael Cohen's the CEO. He was on the Dawn of Drones a while ago. But Naya, his assistant, was at one of the shows. She had the VR goggles. She's walking. It was almost like when you watch Iron Man, and he's got he's like doing this, and he's got the 3D model. She's like walking around the expo hall floor doing these movements, and it's just like Tai Chi. But she was like literally like in the building, and you could see it on the screen, like what she could see. And that was, I think, really super cool. So I'm impressed by that. I think there is a future for VR, AR, but like this humanoid, like, hey, cool, like pictures in the metaverse.
So it's
like,
interesting to say that, because that brings up the thing that I actually did think was cool from the most recent set of Facebook announcements was their partnership with Ray-Ban. Actually produced a set of glasses that can live stream straight to Facebook. So I'm looking into it, Dawn, to see if we could kind of, because right now it said stream to Facebook, but I'm like, well, can we hack that? Because Facebook's useless for streaming. I'll say it right here. But if we could hack it to stream to our other networks, we could put a pair of goggles on you or me at any of the shows that we go to.
You can walk around.
Yeah, and literally do interviews talking with people. I think that would be a great setup. And that's like the level of innovation that I want to see out of this. It's just, to me, this focus specifically on this metaverse angle, which, by the way, is a term in the novel Snow Crash for like a dystopian version of the internet. So interesting that he uses it for marketing and changing his company name. But like, there's literal uses. And actually, Kay brought up one using quantum Kyle Nordfors. We use VR for pilot training in airlines. Right. So when the facsimile or digital twin gets real enough where you actually are getting mechanical training out of it, muscle memory training out of it, I think that stuff is awesome. It's just this like specific focus on metaverse, and
maybe in healthcare, Mike. I don't know. I'd love to hear what David thinks.
It's interesting because when I saw that, first of all, we're all a little geeky. So yeah, I think it's cool. I'd like to try it out, but that's not the majority of the world, right? I'm thinking is who's actually going to use this stuff?
Right. Who's going to scan their body?
And what's the killer app? Is having an avatar view, is that going to really enhance Zoom enough that more people will say, I could use this more frequently? Part of me thinks there and besides gaming, for obvious reasons, gaming, it'll be cool, but I think it seems to go back to their metaverse thing, and I think there are other critical pieces that still, this is like one piece, but still the other pieces. Like when you really want to substitute being in person and being there, there are some things visual, but you also have other senses. If you were going to, look, I have stuff coming from Amazon, constantly. But if I was going to buy a couch, you want to be able to touch it. Does it weigh anything? How does it feel? Is it built well? When you're inspecting something, you're not just visually looking at something. And so I wonder if it's just one piece of what really needs to get to where he wants to get to, this true metaverse. For substituting being physically in person, I think you're going to have a lot of other senses and stuff, and not just, hey, you look real when you're there. That may help for some things, and I don't know how far along they are in the other pieces. So I'm just searching for like what the killer app is that you could use just this, but I think it's part of something else that has to be more. There's other senses you need to substitute, and I haven't seen that piece yet.
Yeah, one of the things that's even hurt their frontline on gaming is they're not a game company, right? So they're actually the worst. They were a social media company that made two-dimensional UIs, and so I don't care how many engineers you're overpaying to make this, you aren't operating on the same market conditions that the people that are working at Weta Digital or Sony Pictures or Epic Games or wherever, who day to day their entire business is built around this cycle of developing 3D assets in a virtual world and determining the best ways that users can interact with them and have fun, right? So I think they have a huge uphill battle with that stuff. And I think that's why they've been the most successful at the hardware itself, right? Because that you can they have the assets that they can produce, and they have the money that they could produce something that valuable there. Andrew, what are you thinking from an engineer side?
Yeah, from an engineer, this was awesome. Just like everybody else says, like the ray tracing is incredible. They shine the light at the very beginning. You can see how it plays in the scenario. And it's happening in real time. And like the computing power that it takes to do those type of renderings, especially in real, it's insane. Now, I don't know if they had something external because you could see like wires heading down their back.
Yeah.
Either way, it was really cool. I think they crossed the uncanny valley. I think they looked incredible on there, like real world. And I know that we're talking about like where could we use this, but in the hardware industry, people said the same thing about like micro hard drives, right? Like they made them and then they were like, who is going to use these? Like nobody cares. And then laptops and personal gaming devices came out. So I would say, even though we don't see like a use for it right now, I definitely think that the technology is going to be applicable moving forward. People are going to say, hey, we could actually use this for, who knows, like healthcare workers are performing surgeries with like the Da Vinci, medical devices and stuff like that. So I think that there will be uses for it moving forward. And I thought it was a really cool demo.
Yeah. What was I going to say? It was, do you think that they beat out Apple? Because that's my first instinct, is that maybe they didn't get it into a form factor, but this tech seems like, even if the use case they're pushing is not the right one, it does seem like it's a leap ahead of what Apple was trying to do with theirs.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think they are. And they're definitely like pushing hard toward it. We have a Meta Quest 2. We just got a Meta Quest 2 in office. It's insane. It's insane too. The fact that you can have these devices that are completely unplugged. I think people don't appreciate just exactly how much GPU power that you need for those. Like exactly like what goes in programming wise to these devices. So I think Apple's, to be honest with you, I'm not really an Apple fanboy. I think they're stagnant. I think they're plateauing on all their stuff. They're going over to a SaaS model, which is fine for them, but I think they are. I think they will beat them in the future as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the hardware. I really do. I think they did a lot with that, and I think they're still pushing. I was worried after Carmack left. So they had John Carmack, who's famous for producing Doom and id Tech and whatnot, and also launching rockets and improving Ferraris. So he was the right type of engineer that they needed. But the big question for me is, will Mark get in the way of the actual progress? Because that seems to be what's happening here.
Sounds like Elon. Wait a minute. Is the cage match happening or not? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Come on. We want to see it.
Exactly.
What were you going to say, Andrew?
What do you mean by it? What do you mean, Mark, getting in the way?
Well, so he's unique in an owner of a tech company, a public tech company that he has complete controlling shares, right? So he literally is where the buck stops on things. And it seems like the push onto this totality of a metaverse angle has led to a complete wasting of funds. Where had he been more focused on, let's build a piece of hardware that freaking works first, rather than this concept of I'm going to unify all my people on Facebook into now a virtual space, and this will be the device that I lock them in with. I think they'd be even further ahead. I think they would make Apple stuff look laughable, because they do seem to have some real talent on that team that's able to produce interesting things.
Yeah. I mean, it may not be Facebook, who actually leverages the technologies. Plenty of cases, right, where somebody builds something like that and somebody else really takes that kind of technology and really leverages it and makes it.
Yeah, so again, that's where Mark could get in the way, right? Especially kind of the pattern right now is to lock things down again and be less open. So if he locks the technology down, I don't see many other players in the space that are advancing as far as Meta. I think it will actually
AI though? Was it Llama or whatever, the thing he created? Isn't it open source?
Yeah, after it got stolen though.
Oh.
Yeah, so that was like, yeah, we meant to open source it all along because we're so far behind on our competitors on this specific tech. So that was kind of like, okay, if we're not going to win the race, I'm going to shoot people in the kneecaps. But with this, there's so few people that could actually produce this hardware that have the supply chain locked down. It's basically Meta, Apple, NVIDIA. I think that's it, right? So if he tries to lock it down and make it proprietary in any way, if he struggles through that, it will hold, I think, this entire sphere of technology back by at least 2 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we tried to stream, I mean, we're in the drone world, right? So we're trying to stream video, and you're right, it is like super locked down. It's like, all right, well, how do we enable this thing? And conceptually, it shouldn't be that hard, but they don't make it open source. They don't make it super easy, like if you want to make a video game, great. But yeah, so I know where you're coming from, Mike.
All right. So we all agree. It was a great show. We could at least agree on that. Thank you, actually. This was a fantastic, in-depth conversation. We touched on a lot of stuff in technology. I want to thank our sponsors, Rubric Law, Era Vigilance, Sentrycs, and CSG Strategies. I already said thank you to our speakers, but I also want to thank our audience, specifically Kay and Kyle, for chiming in today. We do appreciate the questions, and they were really valuable today. Dawn, what do we got coming up this week?
Yeah, a lot of things coming up. Dawn of Drones, Wednesday, 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Eastern on AVSI channels. We've got Cody Retlich. He's with Drone-A-Dare. So drone pilots out there, you're going to want to watch this. This is a software that's going to help you basically manage your business. And then Thursday on our Clubhouse at 11 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern. We've got Brett Feddersen from Defense Solutions on that show. We've been talking about commercial drones on the battlefield, and I want to put the plug in also. If you all have not signed up for my Law Tech Connect Online free stream of the panel from AVSI Exponential this year called Commercial Off-the-Shelf Drones on the Battlefield, Implications to the Law of War. Check it out. You go to my website and find the link and register. It's going to stream on Tuesday, October 24th at 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 Eastern. 3 retired general officers from the Air Force on there, Air Force Academy Professor Major, and Skydio, Brendan Groves. For those of you who don't know, we tapped into his expertise from his previous career and time at the Department of Justice, where he wrote their domestic drone policies. So check that out. And he's a former Air Force JAG, by the way. He was on our Full Tilt. So check that out. And I think that's all she wrote, Mike.
Yeah, I actually would. I want to commend people to actually sign up for that too, because I was in the room when they were talking, and it's one of the rarest conversations. You're not going to get access to people like that anywhere else. And Brendan in particular had a real big insight about why drones have scaled down so fast in size from what they used to be in previous conflicts to how they're being deployed and used in the Ukraine, that I think it's totally unique experience. So it's definitely worth checking out. We had a great show. Thank you, everybody. We will see you coming up this week. So we are out here.